In the fog-drenched shadows of Victorian London, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson face a chilling mystery. A cryptic telegram lures them to Blackthorn Manor, where a malevolent shadow claims lives with blood-inked warnings. As they unravel an occult conspiracy led by the sinister Brotherhood of the Eben Spiral, the shadow grows stronger, turning on its masters. From haunted crypts to cursed wells, every clue points to a terrifying truth. Their trusted ally, Mrs. Hudson, is the shadow's heart. Can Holmes's logic defeat an ancient evil, or will the shadow's debt consume them all? Chapter 1. The Enigmatic Telegram. The fog clung to Baker Street like a shroud, thick and unyielding, as if London itself were holding its breath. It was late October, and the chill of autumn had settled into the bones of the city, seeping through the cracks of even the sturdiest homes. Inside 221B, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the cluttered room. Sherlock Holmes sat in his armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, staring into the flames with an intensity that suggested he was unraveling some mystery known only to himself. I, Dr. John Watson, sat at the writing desk, attempting to chronicle one of our recent cases, though my pen hovered more than it wrote. The silence between us was comfortable, familiar, yet tinged with an unspoken restlessness. It was just past 9 in the evening when the sharp rap at the door shattered the quiet. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps echoed up the stairs, followed by her voice, tinged with irritation. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, there's a boy here with a telegram. Says it's urgent." Holmes's eyes flicked toward the door, a spark of interest igniting in their depths. "Show him in, Mrs. Hudson," he called, his voice sharp and eager. "Ah." Moment later, a scrawny lad, no more than 12, shuffled into the room. His cap was pulled low over his eyes, and his coat was patched at the elbows, damp from the fog. He clutched a crumpled telegram in his grimy hand, which he thrust toward Holmes without a word. Holmes took it, his movements precise, and dismissed the boy with a wave. The lad hesitated, as if expecting something more, but a glance from Holmes sent him scurrying back into the night. Holmes unfolded the telegram, his brow furrowing as he read. I watched him, noting the subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers lingered on the paper. "What is it, Holmes?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. He handed me the telegram without a word. The message was brief, written in a hurried scrawl. "Mr. Holmes, come at once to Blackthorn Manor, Harrow. The shadow moves at midnight. Lives depend on it. E. Blackwood." The words sent a chill down my spine, though I couldn't say why. Perhaps it was the cryptic mention of a shadow, or the urgency implied by lives depend on it. I looked up to find Holmes already on his feet, his eyes alight with that peculiar blend of excitement and calculation that signaled the start of a new case. "Blackthorn Manor," I said, testing the name. "Harrow's a fair distance. Do you know this Blackwood?" "I know of him," Holmes replied, striding to the window and peering into the fog. "Elias Blackwood, a reclusive scholar of some repute, known for his studies in occult lore and ancient manuscripts. A man of peculiar habits, if rumors are to be believed. He has not left his estate in years, yet now he sends for me with this enigmatic summons." He turned, his expression unreadable. "We leave at once, Watson. Pack your revolver." The urgency in his tone left no room for argument. Within minutes, we were bundled into our coats, descending the stairs into the suffocating fog. The streets of London were eerily quiet, the gaslights casting feeble halos that did little to pierce the gloom. Our cab rattled through the city, the driver muttering about the unnatural weather, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being drawn into something far darker than our usual fare of thefts and betrayals. Harrow lay on the outskirts of London, a place where the city's sprawl gave way to rolling hills and ancient estates. Blackthorn Manor, as we approached, loomed out of the fog like a specter. Its Gothic spires stabbed at the sky, and its windows glowed faintly, as if reluctant to reveal the secrets within. The iron gates creaked as we pushed them open, and the gravel path crunched underfoot, leading us to a massive oak door carved with intricate, unsettling symbols, spirals and eyes that seemed to watch us as we approached. a butler, gaunt and pale, answered our knock. His eyes darted nervously, and his voice trembled as he ushered us inside. "Mr. Blackwood awaits you in the library," he said, leading us through a cavernous hall. The air was heavy with the scent of old books and something sharper, metallic, like blood. Portraits lined the walls, their subjects staring down with hollow, accusing eyes. I gripped my revolver in my coat pocket, my heart pounding despite my efforts to remain calm. The library was a vast chamber, its walls lined with towering bookshelves that stretched into the shadows. A fire roared in a massive hearth, yet the room felt cold, as if the warmth couldn't penetrate some deeper chill. Elias Blackwood stood by a desk cluttered with papers and strange artifacts. A skull with runes carved into its surface, a dagger, with a hilt shaped like a serpent. He was a tall man, thin to the point of emaciation, with hair as white as bone and eyes that gleamed with a feverish intensity. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, his voice low and rasping. "I feared you wouldn't come." "Your telegram was compelling," Holmes replied, his tone neutral, but his eyes scanning the room, taking in every detail. "What is this shadow that moves at midnight?" Blackwood's hands trembled as he gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. This is no simple matter, and time is short." He glanced at a grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum swinging with a slow, ominous tick. "For weeks, I have been plagued by occurrences. Footsteps in empty halls, whispers in the dark, objects moving of their own accord. At first I thought it madness, but then I saw it. A shadow, formless yet alive, gliding through the manor. At midnight, it leaves no trace, yet its presence is undeniable." I shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his words settling over me like the fog outside. "Have you seen this shadow yourself?" I asked. Blackwood nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "Last night, it stood at the foot of my bed watching me. I felt its malice, Dr. Watson, as surely as I feel this table beneath my hands. And then, this morning, I found this." He produced a small, leather-bound journal from his desk and opened it to a page marked with a single, chilling sentence written in red ink. "The shadow claims what is owed." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the journal. "May I?" he asked, taking it without waiting for an answer. He examined the page, his fingers tracing the ink. "Fresh, no more than 12 hours old," he murmured. "The handwriting is not yours, Mr. Blackwood." "No," Blackwood whispered. "It appeared overnight, in a locked room." Holmes's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, flipping through the journal's pages. I caught glimpses of diagrams, strange geometric patterns that seemed to twist and shift when I looked at them too long. "You mentioned lives depending on my presence," Holmes said, closing the journal. "Who else is in danger?" "My household," Blackwood said. "My niece Clara, who lives here, and the servants. They've all seen things, felt things. Last week, one of the maids vanished. We found her shawl in the garden, torn and stained with blood. The police dismissed it as an accident, but I know better. The shadow took her." A cold dread settled in my chest. I glanced at Holmes, expecting his usual skepticism, but his expression was grave. "We shall stay the night," he said, "and observe this shadow ourselves. Show us to the rooms where these occurrences are most frequent." Blackwood led us through the manor, up a winding staircase to a corridor lined with heavy doors. The air grew colder with each step, and the shadows seemed to writhe in the corners of my vision. He stopped at a door at the end of the hall, its wood scarred with deep scratches, as if something had clawed at it from within. "This is where I saw it last," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Be careful, Mr. Holmes. It knows we're here." As he left us, the clock in the hall struck 11, its chimes echoing like a warning. Holmes pushed open the door, revealing a bedroom dominated by a four-poster bed, its curtains drawn back to reveal a mattress stained with dark, irregular patches. The room smelled of damp and decay, and a single candle flickered on a bedside table, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice low, "keep your revolver ready. Whatever we face tonight, it is no ordinary foe." We settled in to wait, the candle's flame our only light. The manor seemed to groan around us, its timbers creaking, its windows rattling as the wind howled outside. I tried to focus on Holmes, on his calm, methodical presence, but my mind kept returning to Blackwood's words. The shadow, the journal, the vanished maid. As the minutes ticked by, the air grew heavier, pressing against my chest like a physical weight. Then, just as the clock began to chime midnight, the candle flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. A sound came from the corner, a soft, slithering rasp, like silk dragged across stone. My heart pounded, and I gripped my revolver, straining to see in the blackness. "Holmes," I whispered, but he silenced me with a hand on my arm. The air grew colder, impossibly so, and then I saw it. A shadow, darker than the darkness around it, rising from the floor like ink spreading through water. It had no form, no face, yet I felt its gaze, a malevolent weight that pinned me in place. It moved toward the bed, its edges blurring and shifting, and I heard a low, guttural sound, like a voice trying to form words in a language I couldn't understand. Holmes struck a match, the sudden light revealing nothing but the empty room. The shadow was gone, but the air still thrummed with its presence. "Did you see it?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I saw something," Holmes replied, his tone clipped. "But seeing is not understanding. We have work to do, Watson, and little time to do it." As we left the room, the journal lay open on the bedside table, though neither of us had touched it. A new sentence had appeared, written in the same red ink. "It sees you now." Chapter 2. Shadows on Baker Street. The journey back to Baker Street was a blur, the fog outside the cab as thick as the unease that clung to me. The events at Blackthorn Manor had left an indelible mark, a creeping dread that no amount of rational thought could dispel. Holmes sat beside me, silent, his sharp profile illuminated intermittently by the passing gaslights. His fingers drummed a restless rhythm on his knee, a rare sign of agitation. I clutched the journal we had taken from the manor, its leather cover cold against my hands, the cryptic sentence, "It sees you now," burning in my mind like a brand. We arrived at 221B just as dawn began to gray the sky, the fog thinning to reveal the familiar outline of our lodgings. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with a worried frown, her hands wringing her apron. "You've been out all night, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice laced with concern. "There's been a man here, asking for you. Strange sort, wouldn't give his name. Left something at the door." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Show me," he said, brushing past her. On the doorstep lay a small black envelope sealed with red wax impressed with the same spiral symbol we had seen carved into Blackthorn Manor's door. Holmes broke the seal with a flick of his knife, revealing a single sheet of paper. The message was written in the same red ink as the journal, its words chillingly precise. "Return what was taken, or the shadow will follow." I felt a prickle at the nape of my neck, as if the air itself were watching. "Holmes," I said, my voice low, "this is no coincidence. Someone knows we were at Blackthorn Manor." "Someone," Holmes murmured, folding the note and slipping it into his pocket. "Or something." He turned to Mrs. Hudson, who hovered anxiously in the doorway. "Describe this man." She hesitated, her eyes darting to the fog beyond. Tall, thin, dressed in black. His face, I couldn't see it clearly. He wore a scarf, pulled high, and his hat was low. His voice was strange, like a whisper, but it carried. Gave me the shivers, he did. Holmes nodded, dismissing her with a curt thank you. Once inside, he bolted the door and drew the curtains, casting the room into a dim firelit glow. "Watson," he said, pacing before the hearth, "we are dealing with a force that defies conventional explanation. The journal, the shadow, this note, they are connected, but the nature of that connection eludes me. We must proceed with utmost caution." I set the journal on the table, its weight seeming to anchor the room's growing tension. "What do we do with this?" I asked. "Blackwood said it appeared in a locked room, and that message..." It's as if the shadow itself wrote it. Holmes stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on the journal. The shadow is a phenomenon, Watson, not a sentient entity. Or so I must assume until evidence proves otherwise. But phenomena can be manipulated, directed. Someone, or something, wants us to believe in this shadow's power. He opened the journal, flipping to the page with the red inked warning. The ink is fresh, yet the paper shows no sign of tampering. Curious. He spent the next hour examining the journal under a magnifying glass, muttering to himself as he tested the ink with chemicals from his laboratory table. I tried to distract myself by writing notes on the case, but my pen faltered. My thoughts, consumed by the memory of that formless shadow in Blackthorn Manor. The way it had moved, silent yet deliberate, sent a shudder through me even now. As morning gave way to afternoon, the fog outside thickened again, unnatural for the time of day. A knock at the door startled me, and I reached for my revolver instinctively. Holmes waved me down, his expression calm but alert. "Mrs. Hudson, who is it?" he called. "It's Inspector Lestrade, Mr. Holmes," came her reply. "Says it's urgent." Lestrade entered, his face pale and drawn, a stark contrast to his usual brusque demeanor. "Holmes," he said without preamble, "I need your help. Something's happened at Scotland Yard. Something unnatural." Holmes raised an eyebrow, motioning for him to continue. Lestrade sank into a chair, his hands trembling slightly. "Last night, one of our constables, young Peters, was found dead in the evidence room. No wounds, no signs of a struggle, just dead. His face was twisted like he'd seen something terrible. And this was scrawled on the wall beside him." He handed Holmes a photograph, grainy but clear enough to show a single word written in red: shadow. I felt my stomach lurch. Holmes studied the photograph, his expression unreadable. "Where is the body now?" he asked. "Morgue," Lestrade replied. "But there's more. The evidence room was locked from the inside. No one could have gotten in or out. And Peters, he was working on a case involving Blackthorn Manor, a missing maid, I believe." Holmes's eyes flicked to me, a silent confirmation of our shared suspicion. "We'll examine the body," he said, already reaching for his coat. "Watson, bring the journal." The morgue was a cold, sterile place, its air heavy with the scent of antiseptic and death. Peters's body lay on a slab, his face frozen in a rictus of terror, his eyes wide and unseeing. I've seen death in many forms, on the battlefield, in the streets of London, but this was different. It was as if something had drained the life from him, leaving only fear behind. Holmes examined the body with his usual precision, noting the absence of marks, the rigidity of the limbs, the unnatural pallor. "No poison, no trauma," he murmured. Yet the heart stopped. Fear, perhaps, but fear of what? He turned to Lestrade. "What was Peters investigating about the maid?" Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. "Not much. Just a report that she vanished from Blackthorn Manor. Her shawl was found in the garden, bloody. We assumed she'd run off or met with an accident. But Peters was curious, kept saying there was more to it." Holmes nodded, his gaze returning to the body. "We need to see that evidence room." The evidence room at Scotland Yard was a cramped, windowless chamber lined with shelves of boxes and files. The word shadow was still scrawled on the wall, the red ink stark against the peeling paint. Holmes examined it closely, sniffing the air and running his fingers along the edges of the letters. "The same ink as the journal," he said softly. "And the same smell, faint, metallic, like blood, but not quite." I felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the growing sense that we were being watched. The room seemed to close in around us, the shadows in the corners deeper than they should have been. "Holmes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "do you feel that?" He didn't answer, but his eyes darted to the far corner, where the light seemed to falter. For a moment I thought I saw it again, the shadow, formless yet alive, hovering just beyond the edge of perception. Then it was gone, and Holmes was moving, inspecting the shelves, the floor, the lock on the door. "There's nothing here," Lestrade said, frustration creeping into his voice. "We've searched every inch. Nothing is ever truly nothing," Holmes replied, crouching to examine the floor. He paused, his fingers brushing against a faint scratch in the wood. "Interesting. This mark is fresh, made within the last 24 hours. A blade, perhaps, or a claw." "A claw?" Lestrade scoffed, but his bravado faltered under Holmes's steady gaze. We returned to Baker Street as evening fell, the fog now so dense it seemed to swallow the city whole. Holmes was silent, lost in thought, the journal and the photograph from Lestrade tucked under his arm. I tried to make sense of it all, the shadow, the messages, the dead constable. But my mind rebelled against the implications. This was no ordinary case, no matter how much I wished it to be. As we settled into our rooms, Holmes lit a lamp and opened the journal again, his eyes scanning the pages with renewed intensity. "Watson," he said at last, "this is no mere haunting. The shadow is a tool, a manifestation of something, or someone, deliberately orchestrating fear. But why? And to what end?" Before I could answer, a scream tore through the house, sharp and piercing. It was Mrs. Hudson. We raced downstairs to find her standing in the doorway, her face ashen, pointing into the fog. "It was here," she stammered. "A figure, all in black, standing right there. It looked at me, and then it vanished." Holmes stepped outside, his eyes scanning the street. The fog swirled, revealing nothing, but on the pavement, etched in red, was a single, spiral symbol identical to the one on the envelope, and beside it, a new message. "You cannot hide." The air grew colder, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in Holmes's eyes. "Watson," he said, his voice low, "we are not just hunting a shadow. The shadow is hunting us." Chapter 3. The Client's Secret. The air in 221B. Baker Street was thick with tension. The red spiral symbol and its accompanying message, "You cannot hide," etched into my mind as vividly as it had been on the pavement. Holmes stood by the window, his silhouette stark against the fog that pressed against the glass, his fingers tracing the edge of the black envelope we'd found earlier. The journal from Blackthorn Manor lay open on the table, its pages seeming to pulse with an unspoken menace. I sat by the fire, my revolver within reach, trying to quell the unease that had taken root in my chest. The scream from Mrs. Hudson still echoed in my ears, and the memory of that formless shadow in the manor clung to me like damp cloth. "Holmes," I said, breaking the silence, "this is no ordinary case. The messages, the shadow, the death of Peters. It's as if something is toying with us, drawing us deeper into its web." Holmes turned, his eyes glinting in the lamplight. "Not something, Watson, but someone. The shadow may be a phenomenon, but phenomena do not write notes or carve symbols. We are dealing with a mind, cunning, deliberate, and dangerously inventive." He picked up the journal, flipping to the page with the red-inked warning. "It sees you now, and this mind knows more about us than we know about it." A sharp knock at the door interrupted us. Mrs. Hudson, still pale from her encounter, ushered in a young woman, her face half hidden by a hooded cloak. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her hands trembled as she clutched a small satchel. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am Clara Blackwood, Elias's niece. I've come from Blackthorn Manor. Something terrible is happening, and I fear my uncle is at the heart of it." Holmes gestured for her to sit, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Miss Blackwood, your uncle summoned us last night with a cryptic telegram. He spoke of a shadow and a journal. Now you arrive, unannounced, in a state of distress. What is this terrible thing, and why do you suspect your uncle?" Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening around her satchel. "My uncle has always been eccentric. His obsession with the occult, with ancient texts, has consumed him for years. But recently, it's changed. He's become secretive, locking himself in his study for days, muttering about debts and promises. Last week I overheard him speaking to someone, or something, in the middle of the night. His voice was different, like he was pleading. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "Did you see who he was speaking to?" She shook her head, her eyes darting to the shadows in the corner of the room. "No, but I felt it. A presence, cold and heavy, like the air before a storm. And then there's the journal. He guards it like it's alive. I saw him writing in it once, but the ink, it wasn't normal. It glowed, Mr. Holmes, like firelight, trapped in blood." Holmes's expression remained impassive, but I could see the gears turning in his mind. "And the maid who vanished?" he asked. "What do you know of her?" Clara's face paled further. "Mary. She was kind, curious. She'd been with us for years. One night she told me she'd seen something in the garden, a figure, cloaked, moving without sound. The next day, she was gone. Her shawl was found near the old well, torn and bloody. My uncle forbade anyone to speak of it, but I know he's hiding something." Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Miss Blackwood, why come to us now? What has changed?" She opened her satchel and produced a small folded piece of parchment, its edges singed as if touched by flame. "This was slipped under my door this morning," she said, handing it to Holmes. "I didn't tell my uncle, I was too afraid." Holmes unfolded the parchment, and I leaned over to read it. The words, written in the now familiar red ink, sent a chill through me. "The shadow knows your name, Clara. Leave or it will claim you too." "Remarkable," Holmes murmured, his tone betraying no fear, only fascination. "The same ink, the same hand as the journal and the message on our doorstep. This is no mere coincidence, Watson. Someone is orchestrating a campaign of terror, and Blackthorn Manor is its epicenter." Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. "Again, there's more. Last night after you left, I heard footsteps in the attic. Slow, deliberate, like someone pacing. But the attic is locked, and my uncle has the only key. When I asked him about it, he grew furious, said I was imagining things. But I know what I heard, Mr. Holmes. And I know it's tied to that shadow." Holmes stood, his movements brisk. "Miss Blackwood, you will remain here under Dr. Watson's protection. I must return to Blackthorn Manor at once. There are answers in that attic, and I intend to find them," I protested, reluctant to let him go alone into what was clearly a dangerous situation, but Holmes was adamant. "You are needed here, Watson. Miss Blackwood is a target, and I trust no one else to keep her safe. Besides, your revolver may yet prove useful." With Clara settled in the spare room and Mrs. Hudson instructed to keep watch, Holmes departed, vanishing into the fog with the journal tucked under his arm. I sat by the fire, my revolver on the table, listening to the creaks of the house and the distant sounds of the city. Clara was silent, her eyes fixed on the window, as if expecting the shadow to appear at any moment. Hours passed, the fog growing, denser, the air colder. I tried to distract myself with a book, but the words blurred, my mind consumed by thoughts of Holmes alone in that cursed manor. Around midnight, a faint tapping came from the window, like fingers brushing against the glass. I froze, my hand on my revolver, and glanced at Clara. She was asleep, her breathing shallow, unaware of the sound. I approached the window cautiously, peering into the fog. For a moment I saw nothing but swirling gray. Then a shape emerged, a figure, tall and cloaked, its face obscured by a scarf. It stood motionless, just beyond the gaslight's reach, its presence sending a wave of dread through me. I blinked, and it was gone, as if it had never been. My heart pounded as I checked the locks and drew the curtains tighter. The tapping had stopped, but the silence was worse, heavy with anticipation. I returned to my chair, the revolver now in my lap, and opened the journal, hoping to find some clue to what we were facing. The pages were filled with strange symbols, diagrams of spirals and eyes, and fragments of text in languages I couldn't read. One passage written in English caught my eye. The debt must be paid in blood, or the shadow will rise. The vessel is chosen, the pact sealed. None can escape its gaze. A chill ran through me, colder than the fog outside. I closed the journal, unable to read more, and glanced at Clara. She stirred, murmuring in her sleep, her face twisted with fear. I realized then that we were not just protecting her from the shadow. We were protecting her from something far worse, something tied to her uncle's secrets. As the clock struck 1, a telegram arrived, delivered by a nervous boy who fled before I could question him. It was from Holmes, brief and urgent. Watson, attic revealed more than expected. Return to Blackthorn Manor at dawn. Bring Clara. The shadow is not what it seems. I stared at the message, my mind racing. What had Holmes found, and why bring Clara back to the very place she feared? The night stretched on, each tick of the clock a reminder of the looming dawn. I sat vigil, the journal and revolver my only companions, the weight of the unknown pressing against me like the fog itself. Chapter 4. A trail of crimson clues. The first light of dawn barely penetrated the fog that clung to Baker Street, casting 221B in a ghostly half-glow. I had not slept, my nerves frayed from the night's vigil, the weight of Holmes's telegram and the journal's cryptic warnings heavy on my mind. Clara Blackwood stirred in the spare room, her face pale but resolute as I informed her of Holmes's summons. She nodded, clutching her satchel, her eyes haunted by the fear that had driven her to us. My revolver was tucked into my coat, its cold steel a small comfort against the unknown we were about to face. We set out for Blackthorn Manor in a hired cab, the journey through London's fog-choked streets silent and oppressive. Clara spoke little, her gaze fixed on the passing shadows, as if expecting the cloaked figure I had glimpsed last night to reappear. I tried to reassure her, but my words felt hollow, overshadowed by the memory of that formless shadow in the manor and the red-inked message, "You cannot hide." Blackthorn Manor loomed ahead as we approached, its Gothic silhouette more menacing in the daylight, as if the fog had woven itself into the very stones. The iron gates creaked open, and the gravel path seemed to swallow the sound of our footsteps. The butler, as gaunt and nervous as before, met us at the door, his eyes flickering with something like pity as he led us inside. "Mr. Holmes is in the attic," he said, his voice barely audible. "He's been there all night." The manor was colder than I remembered, the air thick with the scent of dust and something acrid, like burnt paper. Clara clutched my arm as we ascended the winding staircase, her breath quickening with each step. The corridor to the attic was narrow, its walls lined with faded tapestries depicting scenes of shadowed figures and spiraling symbols that matched those in the journal. My heart pounded, the revolver a steady weight in my pocket. At the attic door, Holmes stood waiting, his face drawn but his eyes alight with the intensity of discovery. His coat was dusted with cobwebs, and his hands were smudged with what looked like ash. "Watson, Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice low and urgent. "You've come just in time. What I've found here changes everything." He pushed open the door, revealing a cavernous attic cluttered with crates, old furniture, and shelves of moldering books. A single lantern cast a flickering light, throwing jagged shadows across the room. In the center stood a table, its surface covered with papers, artifacts, and a large leather-bound tome that dwarfed the journal we carried. The air was heavy, oppressive, and I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, as if the shadows themselves were watching. "Holmes," I said, my voice tight. "What have you found?" He gestured to the table where a series of papers were laid out, each marked with the same red ink we'd come to dread. "This attic is a repository of Elias Blackwood's obsession," he said. "These documents detail his research into an ancient ritual, one tied to a forgotten sect that believed in summoning entities. The shadow, Watson, is no mere ghost. It is a manifestation, bound to this manor by a pact." Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "A pact? My uncle? What has he done?" Holmes's gaze softened, but only for a moment. "Your uncle, Miss Blackwood, has been reckless. These texts suggest he sought to harness the shadow's power, believing it could grant him knowledge or influence. But such things come at a cost. The journal, the messages, the maid's disappearance, all are consequences of his actions." He pointed to a diagram on the table, a complex spiral intersected by lines that formed an eye at its center. "This symbol," he said, "is a sigil, a mark of binding. It appears throughout the manor, in the journal, and now on Baker Street. It is both a lock and a beacon, drawing the shadow to those who bear its mark." I felt a chill, remembering the spiral on our doorstep. And the messages? The ink? Holmes picked up a vial of red liquid from the table, holding it to the light. Not ink, Watson. Blood mixed with an unknown substance that gives it its peculiar glow. The same substance was used in the evidence room at Scotland Yard and in the journal. It's a signature, a calling card of whoever, or whatever, is orchestrating this. Clara's voice trembled as she spoke. The footsteps I heard, were they my uncle's, or something else? Holmes didn't answer immediately, his attention shifting to the tome. He opened it, revealing pages filled with dense handwritten notes and more sigils. The footsteps were not your uncle's, he said at last. I found traces of ash on the floor, leading to a hidden panel in the wall. He moved to the far corner of the attic, where a section of paneling stood slightly ajar. Behind this lies a chamber, and within it, evidence of a ritual gone terribly wrong. He pushed the panel open, revealing a narrow passage that descended into darkness. The air that wafted out was cold and foul, carrying the scent of decay, and something sharper, like sulfur. Holmes lit a second lantern, its light barely penetrating the gloom. "Stay close," he said, leading the way. The passage was tight, its walls rough-hewn stone, etched with more spirals and eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the lantern's light. Clara clung to my arm, her breathing ragged, and I kept my revolver, ready, my senses straining for any sign of movement. The passage ended in a small, circular chamber, its floor inlaid with a massive spiral sigil, its lines filled with the same red substance. In the center stood an altar, stained with dark, irregular patches, and above it hung a mirror, its surface cracked but reflecting our faces in distorted, unnatural ways. "Holmes," I whispered, my voice echoing in the chamber. "This is no study. This is a shrine." "Indeed," Holmes said, his voice grim. He approached the altar, examining the stains. "Blood, Watson. Old, but not ancient. And these—" he pointed to small bone-like fragments scattered across the altar. "Human. Likely the maid's." Clara stifled a sob, turning away. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. Elias Blackwood did this. He killed her. Holmes shook his head. "Not necessarily. The ritual described in the tome requires a sacrifice. But the shadow itself may have claimed her. Blackwood's role is unclear, whether he acted willingly or was coerced. But this chamber is the heart of the manor's disturbances." As he spoke, a low, guttural sound filled the chamber, like a breath drawn through a throat that wasn't human. The lantern flickered and the mirror seemed to pulse, its cracks widening. I saw it then, the shadow, rising from the sigil on the floor, its formless mass coiling like smoke. It had no eyes, yet I felt its gaze, cold and malevolent, pinning me in place. Clara screamed, and I raised my revolver, though I knew it was useless against such a thing. "Holmes!" I shouted, but he was already moving, grabbing a vial of the red liquid from the altar and hurling it at the mirror. The glass shattered, and the shadow let out a sound like 1,000 whispers, then vanished, leaving the chamber silent but for our ragged breathing. "We must leave this place," Holmes said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "The shadow is bound to this chamber, but its reach is growing. We need to find Blackwood and force the truth from him." We retraced our steps, emerging into the attic as the manor seemed to groan around us. Downstairs we found the butler, his face ashen, stammering about Elias Blackwood's absence. "He left at dawn," he said he had to settle a debt. "Took the carriage to London." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Then we follow him. Watson, Miss Blackwood, prepare yourselves. This trail of crimson clues leads back to the city, and I suspect the shadow will not be far behind." As we left the manor, the fog seemed to thicken, curling around us like a living thing. In my pocket, the journal felt heavier, its pages whispering secrets we had yet to uncover. And somewhere, in the heart of London, Elias Blackwood was running from, or toward, a fate that threatened us all. Chapter 5. The Fog of London. The fog that enveloped London as we left Blackthorn Manor was unlike any I had ever seen. It was not merely thick, but alive, swirling with purpose, as if it conspired to obscure our path back to the city. Clara Blackwood sat beside me in the cab, her face pale, her hands clutching the satchel that held the singed parchment with its ominous warning. "The shadow knows your name, Clara." My revolver rested in my coat, its weight a constant reminder of the danger we faced, though I doubted its efficacy against the shadow that haunted us. Holmes sat opposite, his eyes fixed on the fog beyond the window, his mind clearly racing through the labyrinth of clues we had uncovered. The journal, the ritual chamber, the blood-soaked altar, and now Elias Blackwood's sudden flight to London. "Holmes," I said, my voice low to avoid alarming Clara further. "Where do we even begin to look for Blackwood? London is vast, and this fog will make tracking him near impossible." Holmes's gaze didn't waver from the window. "Not impossible, Watson. Blackwood is a man driven by desperation, and desperate men leave trails. His obsession with the occult, the ritual in the attic, they point to a specific destination. There are places in London where such knowledge is sought, where men like Blackwood go to barter with forces they barely understand." Clara's voice, trembling but resolute, broke the silence. "You think he's gone to one of those societies? The ones he used to speak of, with their secret meetings and strange books?" Holmes nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Precisely, Miss Blackwood. Your uncle's research was not solitary. The sigils, the blood ink, the tome in the attic, they suggest a connection to a group, likely one of the esoteric orders that thrive in London's underbelly. The Order of the Saffron Veil, perhaps, or the Brotherhood of the Ebon Spiral. We shall start with the latter, as their symbol matches the one we've seen." I frowned, unfamiliar with such names. "The Brotherhood of the Ebon Spiral? Who are they?" "A secretive sect," Holmes replied, his tone clipped. "They deal in forbidden knowledge, rituals that predate Christianity, and artifacts rumored to hold power beyond mortal comprehension. Their meeting place is rumored to be near the docks, in a disused warehouse marked by a spiral carved into the lintel. If Blackwood seeks to settle a debt, as the butler claimed, that is where he will go." The cab rattled through the fog, the city's usual clamor muffled to a ghostly murmur. The streets were nearly deserted, the few passers-by, mere silhouettes, their footsteps swallowed by the mist. As we neared the docks, the air grew heavier, tinged with the brackish scent of the Thames and something else. Sulfur, faint but unmistakable, like the odor in the manor's ritual chamber. My heart quickened, and I glanced at Clara, who stared, straight ahead, her jaw set with determination. The warehouse loomed out of the fog, a hulking structure of weathered brick, its windows boarded and its door marked with a faint spiraling sigil. Holmes paid the driver and instructed him to wait, then led us to the entrance. The door was ajar, creaking as Holmes pushed it open, revealing a cavernous interior lit by flickering oil lamps. The air inside was cold, damp and thick with the same sulphurous stench. Shadows danced across the walls and I gripped my revolver, my senses straining for any sign of movement. "Stay close," Holmes whispered, his voice barely audible. He moved with his usual precision, his lantern casting a narrow beam that cut through the gloom. Clara followed, her steps hesitant but steady, while I brought up the rear, my eyes darting to every corner. The warehouse was a maze of crates and barrels, some marked with symbols that matched those in the journal. At the far end, a staircase descended into darkness, its steps slick with moisture. As we approached, a low chant drifted up from below, a rhythmic cadence in a language I couldn't place, guttural and ancient. Clara froze, her breath catching. "That's what I heard," she whispered. "In the manor, at night. It's them." Holmes's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Then we are in the right place. Watson, keep your revolver ready. Miss Blackwood, stay behind me." We descended the staircase, the chanting growing louder, the air colder with each step. The stairs opened into a vast underground chamber, its walls carved with spirals and eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the lamplight. At the center stood a circle of figures, cloaked in black, their faces hidden by hoods. They surrounded a stone table, its surface stained with dark, irregular patches, and on it lay a figure I recognized at once, Elias Blackwood, his eyes wide with terror, his wrists bound with rope. The chanting stopped abruptly as one of the figures turned, his hood falling back to reveal a gaunt face, its features sharp and predatory. "Sherlock Holmes," he said, his voice a low hiss. "You were not invited." Holmes stepped forward, undaunted. "Yet here I am, Mr. Varn," the man replied, his lips curling into a smile that held no warmth. "You've meddled in matters beyond your understanding, Holmes. The shadow is not yours to challenge," Clara gasped, clutching my arm. "Uncle!" she cried, her voice echoing in the chamber. Elias stirred, his head turning toward us, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and guilt. "Clara," he croaked, "you shouldn't be here. None of you should." Holmes's gaze never left Varn. "Explain the shadow, Varn. What debt does Blackwood owe, and why does it claim lives?" Varn's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. "The shadow is a servant, bound by blood and will. Blackwood sought its power, but he failed to pay the price. Now it demands what is owed. Lives. Souls, it matters not. You, Holmes, have drawn its attention by taking the journal. It sees you now, and it will not relent." As he spoke, the air grew colder, the shadows in the chamber deepening. I felt it again, that malevolent presence, like a weight pressing against my chest. The other cloaked figures stepped back, their chants resuming, softer now, almost a whisper. The stone table began to glow faintly, the stains on its surface pulsing with the same red light as the journal's ink. "Holmes," I said, my voice tight, "we need to get Blackwood out of here." He nodded, his hand slipping into his pocket, where I knew he kept a small knife. "Varn," he said, his tone calm but edged with steel. "Release Blackwood, or I will ensure the authorities know of this place and your activities." Varn laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The authorities, they are powerless here. But you, Holmes, you are a curiosity. The shadow is intrigued by you. Perhaps it will spare Blackwood if you take his place." Before Holmes could respond, the chamber shook, a low rumble that sent dust cascading from the ceiling. The red glow intensified, and the shadow emerged, not from the table but from the walls themselves, its formless mass coiling like smoke. It moved with purpose, its edges blurring as it swept toward us. Clara screamed, and I fired my revolver, the shot echoing uselessly in the vast chamber. Holmes grabbed Blackwood, cutting his ropes with a swift motion. "Run!" he shouted, pulling Clara toward the stairs. I followed, my heart pounding, the shadow's presence a cold weight at my back. The cloaked figures didn't pursue, their chants growing louder, as if urging the shadow on. We burst into the warehouse, the fog outside thicker than ever, swallowing the world beyond the door. Blackwood stumbled, his face ashen, muttering apologies and warnings. "It's too late," he gasped. "The shadow won't stop. It's bound to me, to the manor, to the journal." Holmes's eyes were flinty. "Then we break the bond, Blackwood. But first you will tell us everything. Every secret, every ritual, every name." As we piled into the cab, the fog seemed to pulse, and for a moment I saw it. A cloaked figure, standing in the mist, its scarf pulled high, its eyes glinting like those of the shadow itself. Then it was gone, and the cab lurched forward, carrying us back into the heart of London, where the fog and the shadow waited. Chapter 6. Whispers in the Alley. The fog clung to our cab like a living thing as we sped away from the warehouse, its tendrils curling through the cracked windows, carrying the faint stench of sulfur and decay. Elias Blackwood sat hunched between Holmes and me, his face gaunt, his eyes darting as if expecting the shadow to materialize within the cab itself. Clara, opposite us, gripped her satchel tightly, her expression a mix of fear and betrayal as she stared at her uncle. My revolver, still warm from the shot I'd fired in the underground chamber, weighed heavily in my pocket, a futile defense against the formless terror that pursued us. Holmes was silent, his gaze fixed on Blackwood, his mind clearly dissecting every word, every gesture. "Mr. Blackwood," he said at last, his voice cutting through the rumble of the cab, "you will tell us everything, now. The ritual, the shadow, the brotherhood of the Eben spiral. Hold nothing back, or you will find no protection from us." Blackwood's hands trembled, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I never meant for this, Holmes. I sought knowledge, not this horror. The brotherhood. They promised me insight into the ancient texts, secrets lost to time. The shadow was their key, a force they claimed could bridge the mortal and the divine. But it demanded a price. Always a price." "What price?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. The memory of the maid's bone fragments on the altar flashed through my mind, sickening me. Blackwood's eyes dropped to the journal in Holmes's hands. Blood. A life, freely given or taken. I refused at first, but they showed me what the shadow could do. It took Mary, the maid, when I hesitated. And now it wants more. Clara, me, anyone tied to the pact. Clara's face hardened. "You knew? You knew it was after me, and you did nothing?" "I tried to protect you." Blackwood's voice cracked, desperation seeping through. "I sent you away, hid the journal, but it found you. It always finds what it's owed." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The journal is the key, isn't it? Not just a record, but a conduit. The sigils, the blood ink, they anchor the shadow to this world." Blackwood nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I wrote the first entries, but the shadow, it writes now. It speaks through the pages, through the blood. I thought I could control it, but I was wrong." The cab slowed as we entered the heart of London, the fog so dense it swallowed the gaslights, leaving only faint halos in the gloom. Holmes leaned forward, his voice low. "Where is the Brotherhood now? Varn and his ilk, where do they meet next?" Blackwood hesitated, fear flickering in his eyes. "An alley off Whitechapel, near the old tannery. They call it the Spiral's End. But you mustn't go, Holmes. The shadow is stronger there, closer to its source." Holmes's lips twitched into a grim smile. "Then that is precisely where we must go. Watson, Miss Blackwood, prepare yourselves. We are not merely hunting answers. We are hunting the shadow itself." We disembarked near Whitechapel, the fog thicker here, laced with the reek of the tannery and the distant cries of the city's underbelly. The alley Blackwood described was narrow, its walls slick with grime, the cobblestones uneven underfoot. A single lantern hung above a rusted door, its light revealing a faint spiral carved into the brick. The air was heavy, oppressive, and I felt the same prickle at my neck that had haunted me since Blackthorn Manor. Holmes motioned for us to stay back, his hand on the door. "Blackwood, you will come with me. Watson, keep Miss Blackwood safe. If anything emerges from this alley, do not hesitate to act." I nodded, my revolver ready, though the thought of facing the shadow again turned my blood to ice. Clara stood close, her eyes scanning the fog, her breath shallow. Blackwood followed Holmes, his steps reluctant, as if drawn by an invisible chain. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage lit by flickering torches. The walls were etched with spirals, their lines glowing faintly, as if infused with the same blood ink. A low whisper filled the air, not words, but a sound like wind through dead trees, rising and falling in a rhythm that set my nerves on edge. Holmes moved forward, his lantern casting long shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. We hadn't gone far when the whispers grew louder, coalescing into a voice, low, guttural, speaking in a tongue I couldn't understand. Blackwood froze, his face ashen. "It's here," he whispered. "The shadow knows we've come." Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then let it show itself. We are not defenseless." The passage opened into a small circular chamber, its floor inlaid with a massive spiral sigil, its lines pulsing with red light. At the center stood Varn, his black cloak blending with the shadows, his sharp features illuminated by a single candle on a stone pedestal. Behind him, a mirror hung on the wall, its surface uncracked but rippling. as if it were liquid rather than glass. The air was thick with sulfur and the metallic tang of blood. "Holmes," Varn said, his voice dripping. With mockery, "You are persistent but foolish. The shadow does not bargain, and neither do I." Holmes stepped forward, undaunted. "What is the shadow, Varn? A trick? A drug-induced hallucination? Or something more?" Varn's smile was predatory. "It is older than you can comprehend, Holmes. A force bound by blood, awakened by greed. Blackwood thought he could wield it, but he was merely its vessel. And now you've brought it another, his niece." Clara gasped, and I tightened my grip on her arm, pulling her behind me. "Stay back," I whispered, my revolver raised. The whispers grew louder, the air colder, and the mirror began to pulse, its surface darkening as if something were pressing against it from the other side. "Holmes," I said, my voice tight. "The mirror, it's like the one in the manor." He nodded, his eyes never leaving Varn. "The mirrors are gateways, Watson. Conduits for the shadow's presence. Destroy it, and we may weaken its hold." Before I could act, the shadow emerged, not from the mirror, but from the sigil on the floor, its formless mass rising like ink in water. It moved with terrifying speed, coiling around Blackwood, who screamed, his voice raw with terror. Clara cried out, lunging forward, but I held her back, my heart pounding as the shadow's edges blurred, its presence a suffocating weight. Holmes moved swiftly, grabbing the candle from the pedestal and hurling it at the mirror. The glass shattered, the sound deafening in the confined space, and the shadow let out a wail that shook the walls. Blackwood collapsed, gasping as the shadow retreated, its form dissipating into the sigil. Varn laughed, unfazed. "You delay the inevitable, Holmes. The shadow is bound to the blood, and the blood is here." He gestured to Blackwood, then to Clara. "You cannot destroy it. You can only feed it." Holmes's eyes were steel. "Then we shall starve it. Watson, get them out." I dragged Blackwood to his feet, pulling Clara with me as we stumbled back through the passage. The whispers followed, softer now but no less menacing, and the fog outside seemed to pulse with the same red glow as the sigil. We reached the cab, Blackwood muttering incoherently about debts and forgiveness, Clara trembling but resolute. Holmes emerged last, his face grim but triumphant. "The mirror is destroyed, but the shadow remains. We must find the source of its power, the blood that binds it. Blackwood, you will lead us to it, or I will leave you to its mercy." As the cab sped away, the alley seemed to close in behind us, the whispers fading but not gone. In my pocket, the journal felt heavier, its pages whispering secrets that threatened to consume us all. And somewhere in the fog, the shadow waited, its gaze fixed on us, unyielding and eternal. Chapter 7. The Locked Room Riddle. The fog that smothered London seemed to follow us back to Baker Street, its tendrils seeping through the cracks of the cab and curling around my thoughts like a noose. Elias Blackwood sat slumped, his face a mask of guilt and fear, muttering fragments of apologies and cryptic warnings about the shadow. Clara, beside me, clutched her satchel, her eyes darting to every shadow as if expecting the formless terror to emerge from the mist. Holmes, ever the anchor in the storm, sat with the journal in his hands, his sharp eyes scanning its pages, though I knew he was piecing together a puzzle far larger than the words before him. My revolver, now a constant companion, pressed against my side, its presence a grim reminder that our enemy was no ordinary foe. We arrived at 221B just as the fog thickened to an unnatural density, the gaslights barely piercing the gloom. Mrs. Hudson met us at the door, her face pale, her hands wringing her apron. "Mr. Holmes, there's been something," she stammered. "Upstairs, in your rooms. I didn't touch anything, but it's not right." Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he brushed past her, taking the stairs two at a time. I followed, ushering Clara and Blackwood behind me, my heart pounding with a now familiar dread. The sitting room was as we'd left it, the fire low, the air heavy with the scent of coal and something sharper, sulfur, faint but unmistakable. But the desk, where I'd last seen the journal, was in disarray. Papers were scattered, and in the center, a single page from the journal lay open, its red-inked words glowing faintly. The lock holds, but the key is blood. Holmes examined the page, his fingers tracing the ink. Fresh, he murmured. Written within the hour. Yet we had the journal with us. He turned to Blackwood, his voice cold. Explain this, Mr. Blackwood. How does the shadow write in a book we carried? From the alley? Blackwood's eyes widened, his hands trembling. I don't know, he whispered. The shadow, it's not bound by locks or walls. It moves where it wills, through the blood, through the sigils. Clara's voice was sharp, cutting through her uncle's despair. You knew this would happen, didn't you? You brought this thing into our lives, and now it's here, in their home. Holmes raised a hand, silencing her. Recriminations later, Miss Blackwood. For now, we must understand the mechanism. The shadow's ability to manifest words suggests a connection beyond the physical. A conduit, perhaps, tied to the blood ink. He turned to the door of his bedroom, which stood slightly ajar. Mrs. Hudson, you said something was wrong. Where? She pointed to the bedroom, her voice barely audible. In there. I heard a noise like scratching, and when I looked, the room was locked, but the air felt wrong. Cold, like a grave. Holmes strode to the door, his movements precise but cautious. He tested the handle, finding it indeed locked, though the key was missing. Watson, he said, your revolver. Be ready. I nodded, drawing my weapon as Holmes produced a small tool from his pocket and set to work on the lock. Clara and Blackwood stood back, their faces pale, while Mrs. Hudson hovered in the doorway, clutching a rosary. The lock clicked, and Holmes pushed the door open, revealing a room plunged in darkness despite the morning hour. The curtains were drawn, the air icy, and the same sulphurous stench filled the space, stronger now, mingled with the metallic tang of blood. Holmes lit a lantern, its light revealing a chilling scene. The room was untouched, bed made, books neatly stacked, but on the far wall above the headboard, a spiral sigil had been carved into the plaster, its lines filled with the glowing red blood ink. Beneath it, scrawled in the same substance, were the words, "The room is sealed, the debt unpaid." I felt a chill, not just from the cold, but from the realization that the shadow had been here, in our sanctuary, while we were away. Holmes, I said, my voice tight, this is no ordinary intrusion. The door was locked, the window secure. How did it get in? Holmes's eyes scanned the room, his expression unreadable. It didn't get in, Watson. It was summoned, or it never left. The sigil is the key, a mark of its presence, an anchor for its power. He approached the wall, examining the carving. Fresh, like the ink. The plaster is still damp. Blackwood sank into a chair, his head in his hands. It's my fault, he moaned. I thought I could control it, use it to unlock the secrets of the tome. But the shadow, it uses me. It uses the blood. Clara's eyes blazed. What did you do, Uncle? What did you promise it? Holmes answered before Blackwood could. He promised a life, Miss Blackwood. The ritual in the attic, the maid's disappearance, the blood ink, all point to a pact. But the shadow is greedy, and Blackwood's offering was insufficient. He turned to Blackwood, his voice like steel. Who else is involved? Varn, the Brotherhood, name them all. Blackwood's voice was barely a whisper. Varn is their leader, but there are others. A woman, Lysandra, who guards the mirrors. A man, Corvus, who collects the blood. They meet at the spiral's end. But there are other places, hidden rooms, forgotten crypts. They're everywhere, Holmes, and the shadow binds them all. Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. Then we shall find these places. But first, this room. He began a methodical search, checking the floorboards, the walls, the furniture. I joined him, my revolver still in hand, while Clara watched. Blackwood, her expression a mix of anger and pity. As we searched, a faint scratching came from beneath the bed, slow and deliberate, like nails on wood. I froze, my heart pounding, and glanced at Holmes. He knelt, lifting the bed's edge. and revealed a small, locked box, its surface etched with the spiral sigil. The scratching came from within, growing louder, more insistent. "Holmes," I said, my voice shaking. "What is that?" He produced, his lock-picking tools, his hands steady despite the unnatural sound. "A piece of the puzzle, Watson." The lock clicked and he opened the box, revealing a small cracked mirror, its surface rippling like the one in the warehouse. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low whisper, the same guttural voice we'd heard in the alley. Clara gasped, backing away. "It's like the one in the manor." Holmes's face was grim. "Another gateway. The shadow uses these mirrors to move, to watch." He wrapped the mirror in a cloth, careful not to touch its surface, and placed it in his bag. "We must destroy it, but not here. The sigil on the wall suggests this room is compromised." As he spoke, the air grew colder, the lantern flickering. The sigil on the wall pulsed, its red lines glowing brighter, and the whisper became a voice. Clear and chilling. "The lock is blood. The key is death." I felt the shadow's presence, a weight that pressed against my chest, and for a moment I saw it, a formless mass, coiling in the corner, its edges blurring as it moved toward us. "Out," Holmes shouted, grabbing Blackwood and pushing Clara toward the door. I followed, my revolver raised, though I knew it was useless. The shadow surged, its form filling the room, but we reached the sitting room and slammed the door, the lock clicking. Behind us, the house was silent, but the air thrummed with tension. Holmes turned to Blackwood. "You will help us find Lysandra and Corvus. The shadow's power lies in its anchors, the mirrors, the sigils, the blood. We break them, we break it." Blackwood nodded, his face ashen. "There's a crypt beneath St. Dunstan's church. They meet there tonight. But Holmes, the shadow, it knows you're coming." Holmes's smile was cold. "Let it. Watson, Miss Blackwood, we have work to do. The locked room has given us a riddle, and I intend to solve it." As we prepared to leave, the journal on the desk lay open, a new message scrawled in red. "The crypt awaits, but the shadow is closer." The fog outside pulsed, and in its depths I glimpsed a cloaked figure, its eyes glinting, watching us from the mist. Chapter 8. A Game of Motives. The fog that choked London seemed to tighten its grip as we left Baker Street, its tendrils weaving through the streets like a living thing, carrying the faint, acrid scent of sulfur that had become all too familiar. Elias Blackwood sat in the cab, his hands bound loosely with cord at Holmes's insistence, his face a mask of resignation and fear. Clara, beside me, clutched her satchel, her eyes fixed on the fog beyond the window, as if the cloaked figure we'd glimpsed might emerge at any moment. My revolver, a constant weight in my pocket, offered little comfort against the shadow that seemed to stalk us through the mist. Holmes, as ever, was a study in focus, his sharp eyes scanning the journal, its latest message. "The crypt awaits, but the shadow is closer," burning in my mind like a warning flare. "Holmes," I said, my voice low to avoid further unsettling Clara. "This crypt beneath St. Dunstan's, how do we know it's not a trap?" "Blackwood's led us to danger before." Holmes's gaze didn't lift from the journal. "It is undoubtedly a trap, Watson. But traps reveal as much as they conceal. The Brotherhood of the Eben Spiral, Varn, Lysandra, Corvus, they play a game of motives, each with their own agenda. Blackwood's fear makes him a pawn, but a pawn can still point the way to the king." Blackwood stirred, his voice hoarse. "I'm no pawn, Holmes. I was misguided, yes, but I never meant for this. The Brotherhood promised knowledge, power, over the unseen. I didn't know the shadow would demand so much." Clara's eyes flashed with anger. "You knew enough to sacrifice Mary, to let that thing into our home. And now it's after us all." Holmes raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. "Miss Blackwood, your uncle's motives are clear. Greed for knowledge, tempered by cowardice. But the Brotherhood's goals are murkier. Why target you? Why draw me into this? The shadow is a tool, but whose hand wields it?" The cab rattled through Whitechapel, the fog so dense it swallowed the street signs, leaving only the faint glow of gaslights to guide us. St. Dunstan's church emerged. From the mist, its ancient spire a jagged silhouette against the gray. The crypt, Blackwood had said, was accessible through a side entrance, hidden behind a rusted gate. As we disembarked, the air grew colder, the sulphurous stench stronger, mingling with the damp rot of old stone. My heart pounded, the memory of the shadow in the locked room vivid and unrelenting. Holmes led the way, his lantern casting a feeble beam that barely pierced the fog. The gate creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The walls were slick with moisture, etched with faint spirals that seemed to pulse in the lantern's light. Clara hesitated, her breath catching, but Holmes's steady presence urged her forward. Blackwood followed, his bound hands making him stumble, his eyes darting as if expecting the shadow at every turn. The crypt was a labyrinth of stone, its air heavy with the scent of earth and decay. Niches lined the walls, filled with crumbling coffins and faded inscriptions, their shadows twisting in the flickering light. At the center of the chamber stood a stone table, its surface carved with a massive spiral sigil, its lines filled with the glowing red blood ink. Above it hung another mirror, its surface uncracked but rippling, as if something pressed against it from within. A figure stepped from the shadows, Lysandra, Blackwood had called her. She was tall, her black cloak flowing like liquid, her face pale and angular, with eyes that gleamed like polished obsidian. "Holmes," she said, her voice smooth but edged with menace, "you are tenacious, but you tread where mortals should not." Holmes's expression was impassive. "And you, Lysandra, play a dangerous game. The shadow, the mirrors, the blood. What is your motive? Power, revenge, or something older?" She smiled, a cold, serpentine curve of her lips. "The shadow serves the Brotherhood, and the Brotherhood serves the Eternal. Blackwood was a means, a vessel to awaken it. But you, Holmes, you are an anomaly. The shadow is curious about you." I felt a chill, the air growing heavier, the mirror's surface pulsing faster. "Holmes," I whispered, my revolver raised. "She's stalling." He nodded, his eyes scanning the chamber. "Where is Corvus and Varn? The Brotherhood seems incomplete." Lysandra's smile widened. "Corvus is near, collecting what is owed. Varn, he watches from afar, but you need not concern yourself with them. The shadow is here, and it hungers." As she spoke, the sigil on the table glowed brighter, and the whispers began, low, guttural, rising from the stone itself. The mirror rippled violently, and the shadow emerged, its formless mass coiling like smoke, its presence a suffocating weight. Clara gasped, pressing against me, while Blackwood whimpered, sinking to his knees. Holmes moved swiftly, producing a vial of the blood ink from his pocket, the same he'd taken from the attic. "Watson, the mirror," he shouted, hurling the vial at the glass. It shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot, and the shadow wailed, its form retreating into the sigil. But Lysandra was unfazed, her laughter cutting through the chaos. "You think breaking mirrors will stop it?" she said. "The shadow is bound to the blood, not the glass, and the blood is here." She gestured to Blackwood, then to Clara. "One must pay the debt." Holmes's eyes were steel. "Then let's play your game, Lysandra. Name the price." Before she could answer, a new sound filled the crypt, a slow, deliberate scraping, like metal on stone. From a side passage, another figure emerged. "Corvus," Blackwood had said. He was massive, his cloak barely containing his bulk, his hands stained with red, holding a curved blade etched with spirals. "The price is simple," he growled. "A life for the shadow. Choose, Holmes, or it chooses for you." I raised my revolver, my hand steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. "Stay back," I warned, but Corvus only laughed, his blade glinting in the lantern's light. Holmes stepped between us, his voice calm but commanding. "Watson, protect Miss Blackwood." "Blackwood, stay down." He turned to Lysandra and Corvus. "You underestimate me. The shadow is a tool, and tools can be broken. Tell me how to sever its bond." or I will ensure the Brotherhood falls with it." Lysandra's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, the shadow surged again, this time from the walls, its formless mass enveloping the chamber. It moved with terrifying speed, coiling around Corvus, who screamed. A sound cut short as the shadow tightened. His blade clattered to the floor, and his body slumped, lifeless, his face frozen in terror. Lysandra's composure cracked, her voice sharp. "You've angered it, Holmes. The debt must be paid." Holmes grabbed Clara, pulling her toward the stairs. "Watson, Blackwood now." I dragged Blackwood to his feet, my revolver still raised, and we fled, the shadows' whispers chasing us, the air thick with its malevolent presence. We reached the churchyard, the fog swallowing the crypt behind us, but the whispers lingered, echoing in my ears. In the cab, Holmes's face was grim. "The shadow is growing stronger, Watson. It's no longer bound to the mirrors or the sigils. The blood is the key, and Blackwood knows more than he's told us." Blackwood's voice was a whisper. "There's a relic, hidden in the manor. It's what started this, the source of the shadow's power. I can take you to it." Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then we return to Blackthorn Manor. The game of motives is far from over, and I intend to win." As we sped through the fog, the journal in Holmes's hands lay open, a new message scrawled in red. "The relic waits, but the shadow follows." And in the mist, I saw it again. The cloaked figure, its eyes glinting, a silent promise of the horror to come. Chapter 9. The Midnight Intruder. The fog that blanketed London as we raced back to Blackthorn Manor was a living shroud, its tendrils weaving through the cab's windows, carrying the now familiar stench of sulfur and decay. Elias Blackwood sat, slumped, his bound hands trembling, his eyes hollow with the weight of his confessions. Clara, beside me, gripped her satchel, her face a mix of resolve and dread, the memory of the shadow's attack in the crypt still raw. My revolver, a constant presence in my pocket, felt heavier with each passing mile, its steel no match for the formless terror that pursued us. Holmes, clutching the journal, was a study in intensity, his sharp eyes scanning its pages. The latest message: "The relic waits, but the shadow follows." A chilling reminder of the stakes. "Holmes," I said, my voice low to avoid alarming. Clara further, "This relic Blackwood mentioned, what could it be, and how do we know it's not another trap?" Holmes's gaze didn't lift from the journal. "The relic is the linchpin, Watson. The sigils, the blood ink, the mirrors, all are conduits, but the relic is the source. Blackwood's desperation suggests it's tangible, something he hid, to protect or control. As for traps, we've been in one since the telegram arrived. The key is to turn it against our enemies." Blackwood stirred, his voice a rasp. "I didn't want this, Holmes. The relic. It was a gift from the Brotherhood, a shard of something ancient. They said it held power, but I didn't know it would awaken the shadow." Clara's eyes blazed. "You brought this thing into our home, Uncle. You let it kill Mary, and now it's after us all." "Where is it?" Blackwood's head bowed. "In the manor, hidden in the cellar. I sealed it behind a false wall, but the shadow, it knows. It always knows." Holmes's lips twitched into a grim smile. "Then we shall find it, before it finds us. But be warned, Blackwood. If you're withholding anything, the shadow will be the least of your worries." We reached Blackthorn Manor as midnight approached, the fog thicker than ever, swallowing the Gothic spires and casting the estate in an eerie, otherworldly glow. The iron gates groaned as we pushed through, the gravel path crunching underfoot, each sound amplified in the oppressive silence. The butler, pale and trembling, met us at the door, his eyes widening at the sight of Blackwood. "Sir, you're back," he stammered. "There's been noises in the cellar, scratching like before." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then we're on the right path. Lead us to the cellar and stay out of our way." The butler hesitated, then nodded, handing Holmes a ring of keys before retreating. We descended a narrow staircase, the air growing colder, heavier with the scent of damp stone and sulfur, Clara clutched my arm, her breath quickening while Blackwood shuffled behind, his bound hands making him clumsy. My revolver was drawn, its weight a small comfort against the growing sense of dread. The cellar was a vast shadowed chamber, its walls lined with barrels and crates, its floor uneven stone. A single lantern hung from a beam, casting flickering light that seemed to falter in the corners. Blackwood pointed to a section of wall, its stone slightly misaligned, as if hastily repaired. "There," he whispered. "The relic is behind it." Holmes examined the wall, his fingers tracing the seams. "A false panel," he murmured. "Clever, but not clever enough." He produced a small crowbar from his bag and set to work, prying the stones loose. They fell with a dull thud, revealing a small alcove, its interior dark but for a faint red glow. Inside lay a shard of black stone, no larger than a man's fist, its surface etched with spirals and eyes that pulsed with the same blood ink glow. It sat on a velvet cloth, surrounded by small vials of the red liquid, their contents shimmering unnaturally. The air around it thrummed, a low vibration that set my teeth on edge. Holmes reached for the shard, but Blackwood grabbed his arm, his voice frantic. "Don't touch it. The shadow. It's tied to the relic. If you disturb it—" His words were cut off by a sound, a slow, deliberate scratching, like claws on stone, coming from the far end of the cellar. The lantern flickered, and the air grew colder, the sulphurous stench overwhelming. Clara gasped, pressing against me, and I raised my revolver, my heart pounding. "Holmes," I said, my voice tight, "it's here." He turned, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Stay calm, Watson. Protect Miss Blackwood." He wrapped the shard in the velvet cloth, careful not to touch it, and slipped it into his bag. "Blackwood, where does this lead?" He gestured to a rusted iron door in the corner, its surface etched with a faint spiral. "The old tunnels," Blackwood stammered. "They run beneath the manor to the woods. I used them to meet the Brotherhood in secret." The scratching grew louder, closer, and the shadow emerged, not from the door but from the alcove, its formless mass coiling like smoke, its presence a crushing weight. It moved with terrifying speed, its edges blurring as it swept toward us. Clara screamed and I fired, the shot echoing uselessly in the vast cellar. Holmes grabbed a vial of the blood ink from the alcove and hurled it at the shadow. It wailed, a sound like 1,000 tortured voices, and retreated, its form dissipating into the stone. "The tunnels!" Holmes shouted, pushing open the iron door. "Now!" We stumbled into the darkness, the tunnel narrow and damp, its walls slick with moss and etched with more spirals. The lantern's light barely reached a few feet, and the scratching followed, a relentless reminder of the shadow's pursuit. Clara clung to me, her breath ragged, while Blackwood muttered prayers, his fear palpable. The tunnel twisted and turned, its air growing colder, the sulphurous stench stronger. Holmes led the way, his steps sure despite the darkness. "The relic is the key," he said, his voice steady. "The shadow is bound to it, but it's also bound to the blood. We destroy one, we weaken the other." We emerged into a small chamber, its walls lined with ancient stones, each carved with the spiral sigil. At the center stood a pedestal, empty but stained with dark, irregular patches. "This is where it began," Blackwood whispered. "The ritual, the pact. I brought the relic here," and the shadow answered. Before Holmes could respond, the scratching returned, louder now, accompanied by a low whisper, the same guttural voice from the crypt. The shadow surged from the walls, its formless mass filling the chamber, its gaze a malevolent weight. I fired again, the shot swallowed by the darkness, and Clara screamed as the shadow coiled around her, its edges tightening. Holmes moved like lightning, unwrapping the relic and holding it aloft. "Enough," he shouted, his voice echoing with authority. "You are bound, and I will break you." He smashed the shard against the pedestal, the stone shattering with a sound like breaking glass. The shadow wailed, its form convulsing, and the air pulsed with a red light that faded as quickly as it came. The chamber fell silent, the shadow gone, but the air still thrummed with tension. Blackwood collapsed, sobbing, while Clara clung to me, her face pale but resolute. Holmes examined the pedestal, his fingers tracing the stains. "Blood," he murmured. "The ritual is incomplete, but the shadow is weakened. We must find the Brotherhood's final anchor, the source of the blood ink." As we retraced our steps, the journal in Holmes's bag felt heavier, its pages whispering new secrets. A new message had appeared, scrawled in red. "The blood runs deep, but the shadow runs deeper." And in the fog beyond the tunnel, I glimpsed the cloaked figure again, its eyes glinting, a silent promise that our battle was far from over. Chapter 10. Secrets of the Old Manor. The fog that cloaked Blackthorn Manor as we emerged from the tunnels was denser than ever, a suffocating veil that seemed to pulse with the shadow's lingering presence. Elias Blackwood stumbled behind us, his face ashen, his bound hands trembling as he muttered about debts and forgiveness. Clara, gripping my arm, was pale but resolute, her eyes scanning the mist for the cloaked figure that had haunted us since London. My revolver, its barrel still warm from the futile shots in the cellar, weighed heavily in my pocket, a reminder of how powerless it was against the formless terror we faced. Holmes led the way, the shattered remnants of the relic wrapped in velvet in his bag, his expression a mask of grim determination. The journal, with its latest chilling message, "The blood runs deep, but the shadow runs deeper," felt like a lead weight in my mind, its secrets pulling us ever deeper into this nightmare. The manor loomed before us, its Gothic spires piercing the fog like the bones of some ancient beast. The air was thick with the now familiar stench of sulfur and decay, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of gravel under our feet. The butler, waiting at the door, looked as if he hadn't slept in days, his eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Holmes," he stammered, "there's been disturbances. The servants are fleeing. They say the manor is cursed." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Let them go. We have work to do. Show us to Blackwood's study." The butler hesitated, then led us through the cavernous hall, its portrait staring down with hollow, accusing eyes. Clara shivered, her gaze darting to the shadows, while Blackwood's muttering grew more frantic, his words a jumble of apologies and pleas. The study was a chaos of papers, books, and strange artifacts, skulls, daggers, and vials of the glowing red blood ink. A massive desk dominated the room, its surface covered with maps and diagrams, all marked with the spiral sigil that had become our torment. Holmes set the wrapped relic on the desk, his fingers tracing the papers. "Blackwood," he said, his voice sharp, "you spoke of a pact, a ritual that bound the shadow. The relic was part of it, but there's more. What else did you hide in this manor?" Blackwood sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "The manor itself," he whispered. "It's built on old ground, sacred to the Brotherhood. The cellar, the tunnels, they're part of a network, older than the house, older than London. The shadow was here before I was, waiting to be awakened." Clara's voice was cold. "You knew this, and you stayed? You brought me here, knowing what lurked beneath?" "I thought I could control it," Blackwood said, his voice breaking. "The Brotherhood, they promised power, knowledge. The relic was the key, but the manor, it's the lock. Every stone, every sigil binds the shadow to this place." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a mix of fascination and urgency. "Then we must find the heart of this lock. The blood ink, the mirrors, the sigils, they're all connected to something central, something hidden in this manor." He began searching the room, his movements precise, his fingers probing shelves, walls, and floorboards. I kept my revolver ready, my senses straining for any sign of the shadow. The air was heavy, the sulphurous stench stronger, and a faint scratching sound came from the walls, slow and deliberate, like claws testing the stone. Clara froze, her breath catching. "It's here," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Holmes didn't pause, his focus on a section of paneling behind the desk. "Watson, help me." Together we pried the panel loose, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, iron-bound chest, its surface etched with spirals and eyes that pulsed with red light. The scratching grew louder, the air colder, and I felt the shadow's presence, a weight that pressed against my chest. Holmes opened the chest, revealing a collection of artifacts, more vials of blood ink, a dagger with a serpentine hilt, and a single cracked mirror, its surface rippling like the ones we'd destroyed. But at the center was a book, smaller than the journal, but bound in the same dark leather, its pages filled with dense handwritten text and more sigils. The air thrummed. As Holmes lifted it, the scratching escalating to a frenzied scraping. "Holmes," I said, my voice tight, "we need to get out of here." He shook his head, his eyes fixed on the book. "This is the source, Watson. The relic was a conduit, but this book, it's the contract, the pact that binds the shadow. Destroy it, and we may sever its hold." Before he could act, the door to the study slammed shut, the lock clicking with a sound like a gunshot. The lantern flickered, plunging the room into near darkness, and the shadow emerged, not from the mirror, but from the walls themselves, its formless mass coiling like smoke. It moved with terrifying speed, its edges blurring as it swept toward Clara. She screamed, and I fired, the shot echoing uselessly as the shadow tightened around her. Holmes grabbed the dagger from the chest, its blade glinting in the dim light. "Watson, the mirror!" he shouted, slashing at the shadow. I lunged for the cracked mirror, smashing it with the butt of my revolver. The glass shattered, and the shadow wailed, its form convulsing as it retreated into the sigils on the walls. Clara collapsed, gasping, her face pale but unharmed. Blackwood was on his knees, sobbing, his bound hands clutching at the air. "It won't stop," he moaned. "The book, the blood, it's too late." Holmes's face was grim as he opened the book, its pages glowing with red ink. "Not too late," he said, his voice steady. "The shadow is weakened, its anchor's breaking. But we must find the final piece, the source of the blood ink." "Blackwood, where is it?" Blackwood's eyes were wild, his voice a whisper. "The well, in the garden. It's where they draw the blood, where the shadow drinks." The scratching returned, softer now but no less menacing, and the air pulsed with a red glow. Holmes wrapped the book in the velvet cloth alongside the relic's remnants. "To the garden, then. Watson, Miss Blackwood, stay close. The manor holds more secrets, and the shadow is not done with us." We forced the study door open, the lock splintered, and made our way through the manor, the fog outside seeping through the windows, carrying the shadow's whispers. The garden was a tangle of overgrown vines and twisted trees, the well at its center, a dark, gaping maw. As we approached, the fog pulsed, and I saw it. The cloaked figure standing by the well, its scarf pulled high, its eyes glinting like those of the shadow itself. Holmes stopped, his hand on the book. "Show yourself," he called, his voice cutting through the mist. The figure didn't move, but the air grew colder, the whispers louder, and the well began to glow, its depths pulsing with red light. Clara gasped, her voice trembling. "It's waiting for us." Holmes's eyes were steel. "Then let it wait. We end this tonight." He stepped toward the well, the book and relic in hand, ready to confront the shadow's source. But as he did, the journal in my pocket grew. Heavier, its pages whispering a new message. The well drinks deep, but the shadow drinks deeper. Chapter 11. The Cipher's Challenge. The fog around Blackthorn Manor thickened as we stood before the well, its dark mouth glowing with an unnatural red light that pulsed in time with the whispers echoing from its depths. Elias Blackwood, his hands still bound, trembled, his eyes fixed on the well as if it were a portal to his own damnation. Clara clung to my arm, her face pale but resolute, her breath shallow in the cold, sulphurous air. My revolver, now a familiar weight in my hand, felt like a child's toy against the shadow that haunted us. Holmes held the velvet-wrapped book and relic shards, his expression a mask of steely determination, though I caught a flicker of unease in his eyes as he studied the well. The journal in my pocket seemed to throb, its latest message, "The well drinks deep, but the shadow drinks deeper, a riddle that tightened the knot of dread in my chest. "Holmes," I said, my voice low. "This well?" "It's no ordinary thing. The glow, the whispers, it's like the ritual chamber, but worse." Holmes nodded, his gaze never leaving the well's rim, where the red light cast eerie reflections on the moss-covered stones. "The well is the source, Watson, the heart of the shadow's power. The blood ink, the sigils, the mirrors, all stem from this. But there's a cipher here, a puzzle we must solve to sever the shadow's hold." Clara's voice was sharp, cutting through the fog. "A cipher? You mean the messages in the journal? They're warnings, not puzzles." Holmes turned to her, his eyes glinting in the lantern's light. "Warnings, yes, but also a challenge. The shadow, or those who wield it, wants us to play its game. The messages are deliberate, each one a piece of a larger code. If we decipher it, we may find the key to destroying the shadow's anchor." Blackwood's voice was a hoarse whisper, his face ashen. "The well, it's where they drew the blood. The Brotherhood, they said it was sacred, that it fed the shadow. I saw them, Holmes. Lysandra, Varn, Corvus, pouring vials into its depths, chanting words that made the air wrong." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And the book?" He held up the leather-bound tome from the study. "What role does it play?" Blackwood hesitated, his gaze darting to the well. "It's the contract, the pact that binds the shadow. I wrote my name in it, in blood. They all did. It's how the shadow knows us, how it claims us." Holmes opened the book, its pages glowing, faintly with red ink, the spirals and eyes seeming to shift under his scrutiny. "Then the cipher lies within these pages. Watson, Miss Blackwood, we must work quickly. The shadow is weakened, but it's far from defeated." We retreated to the manor's library, the only place with enough light and space to examine the book. The fog pressed against the windows, its tendrils seeping through the cracks, carrying the faint sound of whispers. I locked the door, my revolver ready, while Clara spread the book's pages across a table, her hands trembling but steady. Blackwood sat in a corner, his head bowed, muttering apologies to no one. Holmes pored over the book, his fingers tracing the text, his mind racing through patterns I couldn't hope to follow. "The messages in the journal," he said, "are not random. They form a sequence, a code embedded in the words. It sees you now. You cannot hide. The lock is blood, the key is death. Each phrase corresponds to a sigil, a ritual step." I leaned over, studying the pages. The text was dense, written in a mix of English, Latin, and an unknown script, interspersed with diagrams of spirals and eyes. One page caught my eye, its red ink glowing brighter than the rest. A list of names, Blackwood's among them, each followed by a date and a single word, paid or owed. Beside Blackwood's name, the word was owed. "Holmes," I said, pointing. "This is a ledger. The Brotherhood. They're tracking their debts to the shadow." He nodded, his expression grim. "And the cipher is the key to breaking the pact. Look here." He pointed to a series of symbols beneath the names, a sequence of spirals and lines that seemed to form a pattern. "These are coordinates, Watson. But not in space, in time. The shadow operates on a cycle, tied to the blood in the well. The dates correspond to lunar phases, and tonight is the peak." Clara's voice was tight. "You mean the shadow is strongest tonight?" "Precisely," Holmes said. "And the cipher tells us how to disrupt it. The messages, the sigils, their instructions, a ritual in reverse. We must return to the well, perform the counter-ritual, and destroy the book." As he spoke, a low scratching sound came from the walls, slow and deliberate, like claws dragging across stone. The air grew colder, the lantern flickering, and the fog outside pulsed with red light. Clara gasped, her eyes wide, and I raised my revolver, my heart pounding. "It's coming," Blackwood whispered, his voice trembling. "The shadow knows we're close." Holmes's eyes were steel. "Then we move now. Watson, bring the book. Miss Blackwood, stay close. Blackwood, you will guide us to the well's deepest point." We left the library, the manor's halls dark and oppressive, the whispers growing louder with each step. The fog seemed to follow us, seeping through the walls, carrying the sulphurous stench. The garden was a maze of shadows, the well at its center glowing brighter, its red light pulsing like a heartbeat. As we approached, the scratching escalated, and the air thrummed with the shadow's presence. Holmes knelt by the well, opening the book to the page with the cipher. "The ritual requires blood," he said, his voice steady. "But not a life. Our own will suffice, a drop freely given to counter the pact." I hesitated, the memory of the shadow's malevolence vivid, but Holmes was already pricking his finger with the serpentine dagger, letting a drop fall into the well. The red light flared, and the whispers became a wail, shaking the ground. Clara followed, her face pale but resolute, and I did the same, the pain sharp but fleeting. Blackwood refused, his eyes wild. "It won't work. The shadow. It wants..." "More." Holmes grabbed him, forcing his hand over the well. "You made the pact, Blackwood. You will help end it." He pricked Blackwood's finger, and as the blood fell, the well's glow intensified, the wail becoming a scream that tore through the air. The shadow surged from the well, its formless mass coiling like smoke, its gaze a crushing weight. It moved toward Clara, but Holmes thrust the book into the well, its pages bursting into flame as they fell. The shadow convulsed, its form fracturing, and the well's light dimmed, the whispers fading to silence. We stumbled back, the fog thinning, the air lighter. But Blackwood's face was grim. "It's not over," he whispered. "The Brotherhood, they'll come for us. The shadow is weakened, but its masters remain." Holmes's smile was cold. "Then we hunt the masters. Watson, Miss Blackwood, we return to London. The cipher has given us a chance, but the shadow's reach is long." As we left the manor, the journal in my pocket felt lighter, but a new message had appeared, scrawled in red. "The masters see, and the shadow waits." In the fog, the cloaked figure stood, its eyes glinting, a silent promise that our fight was far from finished. Chapter 12. Betrayal in the Shadows. The fog that clung to Blackthorn Manor seemed to pursue us as we fled back to London, its tendrils weaving through the cab's windows, carrying the faint, acrid stench of sulphur that had become our constant companion. Elias Blackwood sat hunched, his bound hands trembling, his eyes darting to every shadow as if the formless terror we'd faced at the well might reappear. Clara, beside me, clutched her satchel, her face pale but resolute, the weight of her uncle's betrayal etched into her expression. My revolver, still warm from the tension of the night, pressed against my side, its presence a hollow comfort against the shadow that seemed to linger in the air. Holmes, clutching the journal, was a study in focus, his sharp eyes scanning its pages, the latest message: "The masters see, and the shadow waits." A chilling reminder that our victory at the well was temporary. "Holmes," I said, my voice low to avoid further unsettling Clara. "We destroyed the book, weakened the shadow. But Blackwood's warning, the Brotherhood, these masters, they're still out there. What's our next move?" Holmes's gaze didn't lift from the journal. "The shadow is a tool, Watson, wielded by human hands. The Brotherhood, Varn, Lysandra, and whoever remains, has a purpose beyond mere ritual. The cipher gave us a glimpse of their structure, but their motives remain obscured. We must draw them out, force their hand." Clara's voice was sharp, edged with anger. "And my uncle. He's part of this, isn't he? He knew about the relic, the well, the blood, and he lied to us even now." Blackwood's head snapped up, his voice hoarse. "I didn't lie, Clara. I hid the truth to protect you. The Brotherhood, they forced me, threatened you." "I thought I could appease the shadow, but it's never satisfied." Holmes's eyes narrowed, his tone cold. "Your protection was self-serving, Blackwood. You signed the pact, fed the shadow with blood. Now you will help us end it, or I'll ensure you face the consequences alone." The cab rattled through London's fog-choked streets, the city a maze of shadows and half-seen shapes. We headed for Baker Street, hoping to regroup and plan. But as we approached, the fog thickened, the gaslights dimming to mere pinpricks. Mrs. Hudson met us at the door, her face ashen, her hands clutching a crumpled note. "Mr. Holmes," she stammered. "This was left an hour ago. No one saw who brought it." Holmes took the note, its black envelope sealed with the familiar red wax spiral. He broke the seal, revealing a single line in the glowing red blood ink. "The Masters meet at midnight in the House of Broken Clocks." Below it was an address, a derelict mansion in Spitalfields, known for its abandoned clock tower, its hands frozen at midnight. "Holmes," I said, my heart sinking, "this is another trap. They know we're coming." He nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. "Of course it is, Watson. But traps are two-sided. They expect us to walk blindly into their lair, but we shall turn their game against them. Blackwood, you know this place. Speak." Blackwood's voice trembled. "The house. It's one of their sanctuaries. The Brotherhood uses it for their highest rituals, where the shadow is strongest. The clocks, they're part of the cipher, a way to mark the shadow's cycle." Clara's eyes blazed. "You've been there, haven't you? You met them there, made your pact." Blackwood's shoulders slumped. "Yes, I thought I could control it, use the shadow's power, but it betrayed me, as it will betray them all." Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. "Then we go to Spitalfields. Watson, Miss Blackwood, prepare yourselves. This is no mere meeting. It's a reckoning." The mansion in Spitalfields loomed out of the fog, its windows dark, its clock tower a skeletal silhouette against the gray. The air was heavy with sulfur and decay, and the faint ticking of broken clocks echoed from within, a discordant rhythm that set my nerves on edge. Holmes led the way, his lantern casting a feeble beam, while I kept my revolver ready, Clara and Blackwood close behind. The front door was ajar, creaking as we entered a grand hall, its walls lined with stopped clocks, their hands frozen at midnight. Dust hung thick in the air, and the shadows seemed to writhe in the corners, alive with menace. A spiral sigil was carved into the floor, its lines glowing faintly with red blood ink. Holmes paused, his eyes scanning the room. "The cipher's cycle," he murmured. "The clocks mark the shadow's time, its power peaking at midnight. We have little time." A low laugh echoed from the darkness, and Varn stepped into the light, his gaunt face twisted with amusement. "Holmes, you are predictable. You destroyed the book, weakened the shadow, but you cannot stop the Masters. The shadow serves us, and we serve greater powers." Holmes's voice was steel. "Name them, Varn. Who are these Masters, and what do they seek?" Varn's smile widened, revealing sharp teeth. "Knowledge, Holmes. The shadow is a key to truths beyond your comprehension. Blackwood was a tool, as are you, but you've brought us a gift." His eyes flicked to Clara. "Her blood will complete the cycle." I raised my revolver, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. "Touch her, and you're a dead man." Varn laughed, but before he could respond, the air grew colder. The ticking of the clocks louder. The sigil on the floor pulsed, and the shadow emerged, its formless mass coiling like smoke, its gaze a crushing weight. It moved toward Clara, but Holmes was faster, producing a vial of the blood ink from his pocket and hurling it at the sigil. The red light flared, and the shadow wailed, retreating into the walls. Varn's composure cracked, his voice sharp. "You can't stop it, Holmes. The shadow is eternal." Holmes's eyes were flinty. "Nothing is eternal, Varn. Your Masters rely on blood and fear, but I rely on reason. Watson, the clocks, destroy them." I hesitated, but Clara didn't, grabbing a candelabrum and smashing the nearest clock. The glass shattered, and the ticking faltered, the shadow's wail growing louder. I joined her, my revolver's butt cracking the faces of clock after clock, the air pulsing with each strike. Varn lunged, a dagger in hand, but Holmes was ready, disarming him with a swift movement and pinning him to the floor. "The Masters—" "Varn, who are they?" Varn's eyes gleamed with defiance. "You'll meet them soon enough. The shadow betrays all, even us." The shadow surged again, its form enveloping the room, and I saw it then. A betrayal within the betrayal. Varn's eyes widened in terror as the shadow turned on him, its coils tightening. He screamed, a sound cut short as his body slumped. Lifeless, his face frozen in horror. We fled, the mansion shaking, the clocks ticking, fading to silence. In the cab, Holmes's face was grim. The shadow turned on its own, Watson. The masters are losing control, and that makes them desperate. We must find their true lair, the heart of their power. Clara's voice was steady, despite her fear. The journal, it's still writing. It knows where they are. Holmes opened the journal, revealing a new message in red. The heart lies beneath where the shadow reigns. The fog outside pulsed, and in its depths, the cloaked figure stood, its eyes glinting, a silent vow that the shadow's masters were waiting. Chapter 13. The Race Against Time. The fog that enveloped London as we fled the house of broken clocks was a suffocating veil, its tendrils seeping into the cab, carrying the acrid stench of sulfur and the echo of the shadow's wail. Elias Blackwood sat slumped, his bound hands trembling, his face a mask of guilt and terror, the weight of his betrayal to the Brotherhood now compounded by the shadow's attack on Varn. Clara, beside me, clutched her satchel, her eyes haunted but resolute. The journal's latest message: the heart lies beneath where the shadow reigns, burning in her mind as it did in mine. My revolver, a constant companion, felt heavier, its steel useless against the formless terror that seemed to grow stronger with each encounter. Holmes, gripping the journal, was a beacon of focus, his sharp eyes dissecting its pages, his mind racing to unravel the cipher that held the key to the shadow's masters. "Holmes," I said, my voice low to keep Clara steady. "The shadow turned on Varn. If it's betraying its own, what chance do we have? And this heart beneath, where do we even begin?" Holmes's gaze didn't waver from the journal. "The shadow's betrayal of Varn is a sign, Watson. Its masters are losing control, their rituals faltering. The heart is their final anchor, the source of the blood ink and the shadow's power. The message suggests it's underground, likely tied to the network Blackwood mentioned. Tunnels beneath London, older than the city itself." Clara's voice was tight, edged with anger. "Uncle, you knew about these tunnels. You met the Brotherhood there, didn't you? Where are they?" Blackwood's head bowed, his voice barely audible. "Beneath the city, a chamber older than the Romans. The Brotherhood called it the sanctum of the ebon spiral. It's where they keep the source, the blood that feeds the shadow. I went there once, but I swear I didn't know what it would unleash." Holmes's eyes narrowed, his tone cold. "You'll take us there, Blackwood. Every detail, every turn. Your life, and Clara's, depends on it." The cab rattled through London's fog-choked streets, the city a labyrinth of shadows and half-seen shapes. The address from the House of Broken Clocks pointed to a derelict district near the Thames, where abandoned warehouses and crumbling tenements stood like ghosts in the mist. The air grew heavier as we approached, the sulphurous stench stronger, mingled with the brackish rot of the river. My heart pounded, the memory of the shadow's attack in the mansion vivid, its wail still echoing in my ears. We disembarked near a collapsed sewer entrance, its rusted grate marked with a faint spiral. "Sigil." Holmes knelt, examining the metal, his fingers tracing the symbol. "This is it," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "The sanctum lies below. Watson, Miss Blackwood, stay close. Blackwood, lead the way." Blackwood hesitated, his eyes wild with fear, but a glance from Holmes spurred him forward. We pried the grate open, revealing a narrow tunnel, its walls slick with moss and etched with spirals that glowed faintly in the lantern's light. The air was cold, damp, and thick with the stench of sulfur and blood. Clara clutched my arm, her breath shallow, while I kept my revolver ready, my senses straining for any sign of movement. The tunnel descended steeply, twisting through the earth, its walls closing in as we went deeper. The whispers began. Low, guttural. The same voice we'd heard in the crypt and the manor, speaking in a tongue that chilled my blood. Blackwood's steps faltered, his voice a whisper. "It knows we're here. The shadow. It's waiting." Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. "Let it wait. We have the advantage now. Its masters are weakened, and we hold the journal. The cipher will guide us. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness, its walls carved, with massive spirals and eyes that pulsed with red light. At the center stood a stone altar, its surface stained with dark, irregular patches, surrounded by vials of the glowing blood ink. Above it hung a massive mirror, its surface rippling like liquid, reflecting our faces in distorted, unnatural ways. The air thrummed with a low vibration, and the whispers grew louder, coalescing into a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. A figure emerged from the shadows. Lysandra, her black cloak flowing, her obsidian eyes glinting with malice. "Holmes," she said, her voice smooth but venomous. "You are relentless, but you are too late. The shadow is awake, and the sanctum is its throne." Holmes stepped forward, undaunted. "Your throne is crumbling, Lysandra. Varn is dead. The shadow turns on its own. Tell me, who are the masters, and what is the source of the blood?" Lysandra's smile was cold, predatory. "The masters are beyond your reach, Holmes. The blood is the life of the sanctum, drawn from the willing and the unwilling. The shadow feeds, and we are its keepers. You cannot stop what is eternal." Clara's voice was sharp. "You're wrong. We broke the book, the relic, the mirrors. The shadow is weakening." Lysandra's eyes flicked to Clara, her smile widening. "Yet you brought the journal, child. It carries the shadow's will, and your blood will complete the cycle." The air grew colder, the mirror's surface pulsing faster, and the shadow emerged, its formless mass coiling like smoke, its gaze a crushing weight. It moved toward Clara, but Holmes was faster, producing a vial of the blood ink from his pocket and hurling it at the altar. The red light flared and the shadow wailed, its form convulsing as it retreated into the mirror. Lysandra laughed, unfazed. "You delay the inevitable, Holmes. The blood is the key, and it flows here." She gestured to a stone basin beside. The altar, filled with a dark, viscous liquid that glowed faintly red. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Then we destroy the source." He turned to me. "Watson, the basin, smash it." I hesitated, the shadow's presence still heavy, but Clara grabbed a rusted pipe from the floor and struck the basin, the stone cracking with a sound like thunder. The blood ink spilled, pooling on the floor, and the shadow's wail shook the chamber, the mirror cracking but not shattering. Lysandra's composure cracked, her voice sharp. "Fools! You've angered it!" She lunged, a dagger in hand, but Holmes disarmed her with a swift movement, pinning her to the ground. "Tell me about the masters," he demanded. "Where are they?" Lysandra's eyes gleamed with defiance. "Closer than you think, Holmes. The shadow betrays all, even us." The shadow surged again, its form enveloping the chamber, and I saw it. A betrayal within the betrayal. It turned on Lysandra, its coils tightening. She screamed, her voice cut short as her body slumped, lifeless, her face frozen in terror. We fled, the chamber shaking, the whispers fading to silence. In the cab, Holmes's face was grim. "The masters are the key, Watson. The shadow is their weapon, but they're vulnerable. We must find them before the cycle renews." Clara opened the journal, revealing a new message in red. "The masters hide, but the shadow hunts." The fog outside pulsed, and in its depths, the cloaked figure stood, its eyes glinting, a silent promise that time was running out. Chapter 14. Unraveled Threads. The fog that smothered London as we fled the sanctum of the ebon spiral was a relentless pursuer, its tendrils seeping into the cab, carrying the sulphurous stench that had become synonymous with the shadow's presence. Elias Blackwood sat slumped, his bound hands trembling, his face a mask of despair, the weight of Lysandra's death and the shadow's betrayal heavy on him. Clara, beside me, clutched her satchel, her eyes haunted but resolute. The journal's latest message, "The masters hide, but the shadow hunts," a chilling reminder that our fight was far from over. My revolver, a constant weight in my pocket, felt like a relic of a simpler time, useless against the formless terror that seemed to grow bolder with each encounter. Holmes, gripping the journal, was a beacon of focus, his sharp eyes dissecting its pages, his mind weaving together the threads of a mystery that threatened to unravel us all. "Holmes," I said, my voice low to keep Clara steady. The shadow turned on Lysandra, just as it did Varn. "If it's hunting its own masters, what does that mean for us? And where do we find these masters it speaks of?" Holmes's gaze didn't lift from the journal. "The shadow's betrayal is our advantage, Watson. It's a weapon slipping from its wielder's grasp, lashing out as its anchors weaken. The masters, those who control the Brotherhood, are the key. The journal's messages, the blood ink, the sigils, they all point to a final sanctuary, a place where the shadow's power is rooted. We must find it before the shadow turns on us." Clara's voice was sharp, edged with frustration. "But where, Holmes? The tunnels? The well? The sanctum? We've destroyed their anchors, yet the shadow persists. And my uncle?" She glared at Blackwood. "He's told us nothing but half-truths." Blackwood's head snapped up, his voice hoarse. "I've told you what I know. The masters, they're not like Varn or Lysandra. They're older, hidden, pulling the strings from the shadows. I never met them, only heard whispers. Names like the Veiled One, the Keeper of the Ebon Flame. They're in London, but I don't know where." Holmes's eyes narrowed, his tone cold. "You know more than you admit, Blackwood. The journal's messages are too precise, too personal. They know our movements, our plans. Someone close is feeding them information." I felt a chill, the implication sinking in. "You're suggesting a traitor, Holmes. But who? Blackwood's been with us, and Clara." "Not Clara," Holmes said, his voice firm. "But someone in the manor, perhaps, or someone we've overlooked. The messages appear too quickly, as if the shadow sees through our eyes." The cab rattled through London's fog-choked streets, the city a maze of shadows and half-seen shapes. We headed for Baker Street, hoping to regroup. But as we approached, the fog thickened, the gaslights dimming to faint glimmers. Mrs. Hudson met us at the door, her face pale, her hands clutching a telegram. "Mr. Holmes," she stammered, "this came just now. No sender, just this." Holmes tore open the envelope, revealing a single line in the glowing red blood ink. The threads. "Unravel at the heart of the city where the shadow sleeps." Below it was an address, a derelict chapel near St. Paul's Cathedral, its crypt rumored to be sealed since the Great Fire. Holmes's eyes gleamed with determination. "The heart of the city," he murmured. "The master's final sanctuary. Watson, Miss Blackwood, prepare yourselves. This is no mere chase. It's a confrontation." The chapel loomed out of the fog, its spire a jagged silhouette against the gray, its windows boarded, its walls scarred by time and neglect. The air was heavy with sulfur and decay, and a faint hum emanated from the ground, like the pulse of a buried heart. Holmes led the way, his lantern casting a feeble beam, while I kept my revolver ready, Clara and Blackwood close behind. The crypt's entrance was hidden behind a rusted grate, its surface etched with a spiral sigil that glowed faintly red. Holmes pried it open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness, its walls slick with moss and carved with eyes that seemed to watch us. The air grew colder, the hum louder, and the whispers returned, low, guttural, speaking in a tongue that chilled my blood. Clara's breath caught, her voice trembling. "It's like the sanctum, but worse. It feels alive." Holmes nodded, his voice steady. "The shadow's power is concentrated here. The masters have built their lair at the source. Stay close." The crypt was a vast chamber, its ceiling supported by crumbling pillars, its floor inlaid with a massive spiral sigil, its lines pulsing with red light. At the center stood a stone altar, its surface stained with dark patches, surrounded by vials of the blood ink and a single uncracked mirror, its surface rippling like liquid. The air thrummed with a low vibration, and the whispers coalesced into a voice, clear and menacing. "The threads are cut, but the shadow binds." A figure emerged from the shadows, the Veiled One, Blackwood had called them. Their face was hidden by a hooded cloak, their voice a low, resonant hum. "Holmes," they said. You have unraveled much, but you cannot undo the shadow's will. It is eternal, and we are its keepers. Holmes stepped forward, undaunted. Your shadow is faltering, its master's dying. Tell me, who are you, and what is the source of the blood? The Veiled One's laugh was cold, echoing in the chamber. The blood is the city's life, drawn from its veins. The shadow feeds and we grow stronger. You, Holmes, are a thread that must be cut. The mirror pulsed, and the shadow surged, its formless mass coiling like smoke, its gaze a crushing weight. It moved toward Clara, but Holmes was faster, grabbing a vial of the blood ink from the altar and hurling it at the mirror. The glass cracked, the shadow wailed, and the air pulsed with red light. The Veiled One's composure cracked, their voice sharp. You cannot stop it. The blood is infinite, the shadow eternal. Holmes's eyes were steel. Nothing is eternal. Watson, the altar. Destroy it. I hesitated, the shadow's presence overwhelming, but Clara grabbed a rusted candelabrum and struck the altar, the stone splintering with a sound like thunder. The blood ink spilled, pooling on the sigil, and the shadow's wail shook the crypt, the mirror shattering completely. The Veiled One lunged, a dagger glinting, but Holmes disarmed them, pinning them to the ground. The Masters, who are they? He demanded. The Veiled One's eyes gleamed with defiance. You've met them, Holmes, in every mirror, every sigil. The shadow is our master, and it will claim you. The shadow surged again, its form enveloping the chamber, but it turned on the Veiled One, its coils tightening. They screamed, their voice cut short as their bodies slumped, lifeless, their face frozen in terror. We fled, the crypt shaking, the whispers fading to silence. In the cab, Holmes's face was grim. The Masters are a myth, Watson. The shadow itself is the master, using the Brotherhood as pawns. We've broken its anchors, but its will remains. Clara opened the journal, revealing a new message in red. The shadow falls, but the debt remains. The fog outside pulsed, and in its depths, the cloaked figure stood, its eyes glinting, a silent promise that our final confrontation was near. Chapter 15. The Final Confrontation. The fog that smothered London as we fled the crypt beneath the chapel was a malevolent force, its tendrils coiling around the cab, carrying the sulphurous stench that had haunted us since Blackthorn Manor. Elias. Blackwood sat slumped, his bound hands trembling, his face a mask of despair, the shadow's betrayal of the Veiled One, a stark reminder of his own precarious fate. Clara, beside me, clutched her satchel, her eyes burning with a mix of fear and defiance. The journal's latest message, the shadow falls, but the debt remains, a chilling prophecy that weighed on us all. My revolver, a constant weight in my pocket, felt like a relic of a lost world, useless against the formless terror that seemed to grow stronger with each step we took toward its heart. Holmes, gripping the journal, was a beacon of relentless focus, his sharp eyes dissecting its pages, his mind weaving the final threads of a mystery that threatened to consume us. Holmes, I said, my voice low to keep Clara steady. The shadow turned on the Veiled One, just as it did Varn and Lysandra. If it's the master, as you say, what's left to fight? We've destroyed the mirrors, the relic, the book, yet it persists. Holmes's gaze didn't lift from the journal. The shadow is no mere entity, Watson. It's a force, bound to this world by blood and will, but its true anchor is not a physical object. It's a person. The messages, the sigils, the blood ink, they all point to a living conduit, someone who sustains the shadow's presence. Clara's voice was sharp, edged with dread. You mean one of us? My uncle? She glared at Blackwood, her hands tightening around her satchel. Blackwood's head snapped up, his voice hoarse. Not me. I swear, Holmes, I was a pawn, a fool. I signed the pact, but I'm not the source. The shadow, it used me, but it's tied to something deeper, someone else. Holmes's eyes narrowed, his tone cold. Then we find that someone, Blackwood. The journal's messages are too precise, too intimate. The shadow knows our every move, as if it walks among us. We return to Baker Street. Our answers lie there, where this began. The cab rattled through London's fog-choked streets. the city a labyrinth of shadows and half-seen shapes. The fog was thicker than ever, the gaslights mere pinpricks, and the air thrummed with a low vibration, as if the city itself were alive with the shadow's presence. My heart pounded, the memory of the shadow's wail in the crypt vivid, its gaze a crushing weight that lingered in my bones. We reached 221B just before midnight, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing. Mrs. Hudson met us at the door, her face pale, her hands clutching a new telegram. "Mr. Holmes," she stammered, "this came moments ago, no sender, just this." Holmes tore open the black envelope, revealing a single line in the glowing red blood ink. "The debt is yours, Holmes. Face me at the heart of the spiral." Below it was no address, only a symbol, a spiral with an eye at its center, identical to those we'd seen in the manor, the sanctum, and the crypt. Holmes's eyes gleamed with a mix of triumph and urgency. "The heart of the spiral," he murmured. "Not a place, but a moment, a convergence. The shadow is calling me out, Watson. It's time to end this." We entered the sitting room, the air heavy with the scent of coal and sulfur. The journal lay on the desk, open to a new page, its red ink glowing. The spiral closes, and the shadow claims. The words sent a chill through me, and I glanced at Clara, who stood resolute, her fear tempered by determination. Holmes turned to Blackwood. "You signed the pact, Blackwood. You know the shadow's will. Who is its conduit?" Blackwood's eyes were wild, his voice trembling. "I don't know. The Brotherhood. They never told me. They spoke of a keeper, someone who holds the shadow's essence, but I never saw them." Clara's voice was steady, despite the tension. "The messages, they're personal, Holmes. They know us, our fears. It's not just my uncle. It's closer." Holmes's gaze shifted to me, and for a moment, I felt a prickle of doubt, a cold fear that I could be the unwitting anchor. But he shook his head, his eyes softening. "Not you, Watson, nor Clara. The shadow's conduit is someone who knows us intimately, who has been with us from the start." A low scratching sound came from the walls, slow and deliberate, like claws on stone. The air grew colder, the lantern flickering, and the fog outside pulsed with red light. I raised my revolver, my heart pounding, as the shadow emerged. Not from the walls, but from the journal itself, its formless mass coiling like smoke, its gaze a crushing weight. "Holmes!" I shouted, but he was already moving, grabbing the Wasa journal and hurling it into the fire. The pages flared, the red ink glowing brighter before turning to ash, and the shadow wailed, its form convulsing. But it didn't retreat. It surged toward Holmes, its edges tightening. Clara screamed, and I fired, the shot echoing uselessly. Blackwood lunged, his bound hands fumbling for a poker by the hearth, but the shadow ignored him, its focus on Holmes. I saw it then, a figure in the corner, cloaked, its scarf pulled high, its eyes glinting like those of the shadow itself. It was Mrs. Hudson. "Holmes!" I cried, my voice breaking. "It's her!" Holmes turned, his eyes widening as Mrs. Hudson stepped forward, her face no longer the kind, familiar one we knew. Her eyes were obsidian, her smile cold and predatory. "You're clever, Holmes," she said, her voice a low hum, unlike her own. "But the shadow chose me long ago. I am its keeper, its heart." Clara gasped, backing away while Blackwood sobbed, his fear confirmed. I raised my revolver, but Holmes stopped me, his voice calm but commanding. "Watson, no. She's not herself. The shadow speaks through her. Mrs. Hudson, or the thing that wore her face, laughed, the sound echoing like breaking glass. You cannot stop me, Holmes. The debt is yours, your mind, your will. They are mine." Holmes stepped forward, undaunted. "Then take me, but you'll find my will is not so easily claimed." The shadow surged, enveloping Holmes, its coils tightening. Clara screamed, and I lunged, grabbing a vial of the blood ink from Holmes's bag and hurling it at Mrs. Hudson. It struck her, and she wailed, the shadow convulsing as it retreated into her, her body slumping to the floor. Holmes staggered, gasping but alive. "Watson," he said, his voice hoarse, "the blood ink, it's her blood. She's the source. I knelt beside Mrs. Hudson, her face pale, her eyes human again but filled with horror. I didn't know, she whispered. They came to me years ago, offered me power. I didn't know it would come to this. Holmes's face was grim. The shadow is broken, its conduit severed, but the debt remains. He helped Mrs. Hudson to her feet, his eyes softening. You'll answer for this, but not to the shadow. As we bound her hands, the fog outside thinned, the sulphurous stench fading. The journal's ashes lay scattered, its messages silenced. Clara's voice was steady, despite her fear. Is it over, Holmes? He shook his head, his eyes distant. The shadow is gone, but its echoes remain. We've won the battle, Watson, but the war is never truly over. In the quiet of Baker Street, the fog lifted, revealing a city scarred but alive. The cloaked figure was gone, its eyes no longer glinting in the mist. But in my heart, I knew the shadow's debt lingered, a whisper of terror that would haunt us always.